All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and I am your host and moderator for tonight's exciting formal debate on the ordering of the fossils in the rock record between Jackson Roe and TRock. I am thrilled to have these experienced, knowledgeable, and always very professional debaters for this event. It is a controversial question. It is a very interesting question, as creationists and evolutionists alike have been going back and forth on this specific issue for years and years now. And from my experience moderating Jackson Roe and TRock on anything origins, creation, evolution related, they always come well prepared and well equipped to discuss these topics. And so, gentlemen, I'm excited. I'm excited for a good, solid, thought-provoking debate. Now, Jackson and TRock, you guys have been here many times in the past, but it's been a little while since the last time you were here. And so it is great to have you both back again for a debate on really just a great topic. And so, Jackson, TRock, let's get acquainted, break the ice a little bit before we get into our opening statements. Let's start with you, Jackson. Tell us, how have you been? How's your 2025 been? I hope it's going really well. And tell us about what you're doing over at your channel.
All right. Well, 2025 has been going pretty good, going pretty fast, actually. And I really just do all kinds of weird hobbies nowadays. I've got like 15 different things I'm doing. I can never focus on one. But one of the biggest ones, fossils. I collect shells. That's another thing I like to do. And recently I've been burying time capsules, which is kind of my newest thing that I'm really into. It's kind of interesting. I've like designed a bunch to last like hundreds or even thousands of years. So it's kind of cool. But
maybe even millions, depending on what we demonstrate.
I know they come to Antarctica, the South Pole Station. They could potentially sit there for that long. We'll see.
Very cool. Well, Jackson, I'm excited because as you iterated, you've been doing a lot of research. Mm-hmm. You've been in the field working and focusing on fossils. TRock has studied this topic extensively. He's been here in the past going over in detail his model of the flood and explaining the ordering of the fossils. So you both have done a lot of unique, novel research on this topic. And so I think this is going to be a good technical exchange. Jackson, appreciate the intro. Great to have you back as always. For those that like what they're hearing from Jackson Roe, check the description box. I do have a link to his YouTube channel where you can check out more from what he has to offer. TRock, great to have you back as well. TRock, I also hope that your 2025 is going really well. And so tell us, how have you been since the last time you were here? Go ahead, TRock.
Thank you, Donny. Is my audio coming in good?
You're coming in good.
Awesome. Thanks for hosting us, Donny. Thank you, Jackson, for joining the conversation. And as always, much thanks to the audience for tuning in. Important conversation because biblical history is of utmost importance. So we're going to talk about it a little bit, but I'm good. I've been, things go real slow during the wintertime and I don't do a whole lot, don't get out too much because of the weather and don't have any side work going on. So I kind of stay in the house and don't do a whole lot, but spring is here and I've been kind of getting pinged into random projects and stuff I got to do myself. But I'm good. I've been studying this particular topic due to the delay that we had. I had a little more time to kind of step myself through, some of the arguments I think might be presented and stuff like that. But I brought some show and tell today, so I was kind of hoping Jackson may have as well.
Well, very good. Yeah, that's good. I like show and tell, especially when it comes to a debate on the rock record, creation, evolution, and fossils in general. And so TRock and Jackson, I always enjoy having you both here, and I know the audience does as well, especially because of all the research and effort you put into this topic. So we'll have to keep you gentlemen both busy for the spring and especially the summer, as I do have some big ideas for the summer in terms of some panel discussions, roundtable debates, things like that. So I'll definitely be reaching out to the both of you. Okay, so for those who want to see more from TRock, you can see in the live chat and also the description box of this video a playlist to past debates that he's done. For Jackson, you can see a link to his YouTube channel. And so again, for anybody just joining us tonight, we are engaging the question: what best explains the order of fossils in the rock record? TRock takes the creation or separate ancestry position, and Jackson Roe takes the old earth and common descent viewpoint. And so let's go over the format for tonight. So we're going to have a fast-paced debate here. We're going to be starting with roughly 10-minute opening statements, but I do want to make sure our guests tonight, in light of all the prep that they've done, have more than enough time to make their case. If you go a minute or so over, that's completely fine. We'll be easygoing. Then we'll jump into an uninterrupted response. That'll be 8 minutes, so 8-minute rebuttals. Then we'll jump into a free-flowing discussion. So rather than being real strict cross-exam, we'll keep it free-flowing and organic, but I'll make sure to give you both ample time each to ask the relevant questions, to bring up the topics you'd like to discuss. Then we'll wrap up our thoughts and points and land the plane on our respective viewpoints and positions with 5-minute closing statements. And then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We'll have anywhere between a 25-minute and 10-hour audience Q&A, depending on how many questions come in. And so please, if you have a question for Jackson, a question for TRock, perhaps you hear something that they say that you disagree with, maybe you want to challenge them, feel free to send in the challenge. Just make sure there's a question mark at the end of it and keep questions and objections professional. Also, tag me if you could, either at Donny or at Standing for Truth, and that way I won't miss your questions. And okay, let's get right into the fun, gentlemen. We have 10-minute opening statements. What best explains the order of fossils in the rock record? We are going to kick it off with Jackson Roe. And so Jackson, if you need a screen share or show any visuals, anything like that, feel free to get that going. But the floor is yours.
Let's see. Okay. Tell me when you're seeing it.
I see something loading in the bottom there, but it's there we go. Fossil record, old or young. It's up on the screen. Yeah.
All right. This probably isn't going to take 10 minutes, but it's got some good points and it's pretty to the point. So a lot to talk about, even though it's not super long. But all right, fossil record, old or young. Predictions and observations that support an old Earth from the fossil record. I've used this example a lot before, but I like it. So the Precambrian/Cambrian tooth problem. Why are shark teeth or scales never found in these layers? And likewise, why are conodont teeth never found in the Precambrian? The Precambrian is said to be the pre-flood world. That's what it represents. Most creationists think that anyway, as far as I can tell. So teeth should have been accumulating in this pre-flood ocean for hundreds of years. And you can't find a single tooth in the Precambrian. It's never been found. Not a single scale, nothing. Spores and pollen. In thousands of extractions from Paleozoic rock, angiosperm pollen has never been found. Likewise, more recent strata lacks lepidodendron megaspores, for example. Anyone with allergies knows how pervasive pollen is, so it should be everywhere, all levels of strata, and plentiful. Just a search of carboniferous spores in the Google Scholar, I got 25,000 publications, and there's no mention of the word oak anywhere in there. The Roraima pollen, which is sometimes cited by creationists, is apparently contamination, as far as anyone can tell. It's the only place that's ever been found. Plus, ultrasonic cleaning of the pollen in the rock, it made the pollen disappear, which indicates it was surface contamination. The Roraima contamination aside, no pollen grains or spores, for that matter, can be found in Precambrian strata. Now, the Earth existed for many hundreds of years before Noah's flood, much like the shark tooth problem I was talking about. In that time, angiosperms, or even gymnosperms should have been blooming and coating the place with pollen and spores. So where is all of that in the Precambrian? Skulkodonts. Skulkodonts are like ancient worm jaws, polychaete worm jaws. They can be found from Cambrian up to today because polychaete worms still exist. I extracted these from Paleozoic limestone I got from Michigan. Of all these worm jaws I discovered, none are out of place. They all belong to those 4 genera there, which I'm not going to pretend to know how to pronounce. These were identified by European scientists, and all are endemic to Paleozoic strata. So the fact that we still have polychaete worms today, why are none of those species mixed in with the skulkodonts from long ago, or what I consider long ago? They're the same densities. They have the same ecologic niches. Why are they not mixed together? And why are the shells found on land, or fossils found on land? Oceans shift over land masses through time. The continents drift and mountains are pushed up. Creationists misunderstand this or don't understand that quite a bit. I don't think TRock is one of them, but still, it's something I hear a lot. And this is a massive 2014 study on fossil bivalves of the Permian, Triassic, and Jurassic. Over 200 genera were plotted on these maps based on their paleobiogeographic range. This study took into account the type of habitat the bivalves would have lived in and other factors. The odds of this pattern arising by chance for this many fossils is astronomical. 281 genera plotted on 61 maps like this. Now, this is the fossil sites they were found in and the position of the continents at that time, which Permian or Triassic, whenever. Now, this wouldn't make any sense looking at the geography of today. It looks like these sites are scattered all over the place randomly, but when you fit them together, it elucidates an ancient shoreline where these pieces fit together, and it just wouldn't make any other sense but deep time. Conodonts. 1,500 species with unique stratigraphic ranges. This is a Polynathus I extracted from Devonian limestone, this conodont element here. So why are they found in this predictable order? They have the same densities and often ecological niches, 1,500 species. Surely a few of those would share ecologic niches. They should be mixed randomly throughout strata, but they're not random. Baltic amber of Eocene age, which is 40 to 50 million years old. They contain several species of oak pollen, but never any spores or pollen of Paleozoic or Mesozoic species. If these oak inclusions represent a pre-flood ecosystem, where are the other species of pollen and spores? There is no explanation of them in deep time, and that's just when you look at the fossil record, and especially a lot of papers about pollen, spores, conodonts, there's really no other way to make sense of it but deep time. So that's my presentation for the opening. Probably not quite 10 minutes, but I think it's to the point.
That's fine. Whatever time we don't use, we can throw into the discussion or audience Q&A. And so, TRock, we will now hand it to you. And the timer is reset. I'll start it when you're ready to go. I see your visuals down here at the bottom. We'll share screen. Reminder to the audience, anybody just joining us, if you got a question or a challenge, feel free to send those in. We always enjoy interacting with audience comments at the end, and the ones that have come in so far, I've got them saved, and we're all caught up. TRock, whenever you're ready, you got roughly 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Donnie. Okay, so it's probably no surprise to most people that I take a very, very different approach to how you determine what order should exist or how you interpret an alleged order in the fossil record. So what we saw from Jackson is pretty much run-of-the-mill for me for how supporters of evolution present their arguments for order in the fossil record, and that is they put almost entirely a biological context on it. My issue with that is that the fossils did not put themselves there. Some geological process put them there. So in order to appeal to speciation, that sort of thing, you're basically not even doing physical sciences at this point. You're simply making a non sequitur argument based on your perception of how your history is supposed to proceed over time, but you're not explaining how the order got there at all. You're explaining how you perceive species should have existed across time, but not how they actually got into the fossil record. Some geological process put them there. And we're going to take a look at the nature of fossils and the geologic column to help establish exactly what the process might have been that put them where they are. So here's a list of characteristics that are ubiquitous in fossil and geology. This is primarily fossil kind of characteristics, but there's a little bit of geology in here. But we see soft tissue. We see exquisite preservation of soft-bodied organisms. We see C14 everywhere. We see presence of marine fossils on the continents. We see an abundance of marine fossils on the continents. We see coal, which is original biomaterial, by the way, going back some 300 million years or more. We see oil, a fossil fuel. I'm curious as to whether Jackson thinks that oil or coal, either one, are considered fossils, knowing that we do call them fossil fuels. But natural gas is also a byproduct of some of those things. But we see well-stratified layering. We see purity of depositions. To me, that by itself tells you catastrophe and lack of deep time. We see scale of depositions. The scale of any particular formation is absolutely enormous across the globe. Lensing and wedging. I'll explain a little bit about that later, but lensing and wedging are immediate signs of catastrophe. Stasis. We see fossils show up suddenly, and what we call living fossils, virtually identical to things that are alleged to be 300, 400, 500 million years old. Trackways immediately signal, some sort of rapid event. Volcanism is, by definition, from a human perspective, catastrophe. Lack of daily erosion. There's weathering that we can see, but there's a lack of daily erosion over a deep time frame. Full permineralized soft-bodied fossils. I actually have one that's something we're going to get to look at here during the open discussion, hopefully. Unpermineralized bone, as in there are examples out there of actual dinosaur bone laying on top of the ground, completely unpermineralized. Rotting smell of some of the fossil dig sites. You can get that straight from Jack Horner and Mary Schweitzer. Polyconglomerate fossils, we can talk about that later, but all of this stuff spells one of two things or both at the same time. They all spell rapid catastrophic processes and recent history, both. And that's how you figure out what it is that happened that created present day order as we observe it. Okay, so here next I've got my list of apparent deep time and apparent slow processes. Absolutely none. There is nothing you can look at in the geologic column that just signals immediately that it must have been millions of years ago or that it must have happened over a very long period of time. I'll say, at the very, very, very minimum on the scale of 10,000 years, but typically we're talking millions of years. There's absolutely nothing in the fossil record or the geologic column that just openly signals deep time or very slow processes. So what are the issues at hand? Trackways like this is just kind of a lead in. If you read this quote here, it says, we don't know exactly what, but it might be that there was a storm event that came in, deposited a load of sediments on top of the footprints and meant that they were preserved rather than just being washed away. This is a quote from Richard Butler, an English paleobiologist. I got the quote and the photo from ICR, but it's basically this type of open acknowledgement from professional evolutionists. It's ubiquitous throughout the literature and in popular media and stuff like that. It's everywhere. Okay, so soft tissue. We've got collagen. We've got an example of squid ink that's been reconstituted, red blood cells, and yes, I do mean red blood cells. Skin pigments, short strand DNA, very short. It's very short. We're not talking, sequenceable genomes or anything, just super short strands of DNA that still exist, that are up against, for deep time, the challenges are freeze-thaw cycles, thermal degradation, and erosion. Here is a very, very vivid picture that came from Mary Schweitzer. This was accessed from creation.com, but it's been out there in the open media for decades now. But here what you're seeing is actual soft tissue from a dinosaur that's still elastic in nature, stretches and contracts similar to how a rubber band does. Another one from Mary Schweitzer. Here's one actual blood vessel, another one from Mary Schweitzer. And if you ever got to watch the interview she did with Barbara Walters, she comes right out and says, these are red blood cells. I've heard numerous arguments saying no red blood cells, it's heme, it's whatever, but she actually calls them red blood cells in her interview. Here I've got a table. This was credit to Joel Tay from CMI. He's I've known about this for a long time. I've mentioned it in past debates, but he has an open running record of soft tissue that's actually recorded in the scientific literature. What I captured here is showing you that in his list, every single entry in this list, and I downloaded the whole list. It's not huge. I tell on one slide exactly how many. There's something like 127, I believe, in there in the database. But the group that I captured here, basically to show you that soft tissue in the fossil record has been known of since 1954, and they had it aged at 360 million years, which dwarfs any of the stuff that Mary Schweitzer has credit for. And of course, I go all the way to 2025. And Schweitzer is in this mix, I believe, somewhere. The very last entry, T-Rex deal from Schweitzer all in 2025, actually, this year. So we also got C14. It's all through. It signals that something recent has happened. It's in coal, it's in diamonds, it's in soft tissue, it's in fossil fuels. It's not background, it's not contamination, and it's well above the detection limits. The common arguments you hear is some form of background contamination, so on and so forth. But there are specific tests that you can do in any one of these settings to determine whether that's true or not. The problem that the evolutionists have is they never demonstrate that they've done such tests. They basically walk away and say, well, it could still be contamination, but they don't definitively test and determine whether it is or not. This is a link. If you follow this link, it's some really good stuff from John Mackay and the Creation Research Group. They've done some stuff with coal to demonstrate that there is nothing about coal that signals deep time. He likes to say it's not about time, it's about process, and he's absolutely right, of course. But he shows you right here on the screen, you can see his recipe for how he gets the most effective results in coalifying plant material. He's got 20 grams of clay. I believe that says 20 mils of water and 20 grams of fern plant material. Here's another one, 58 days. It's unrelated to the previous slide, but different. It's a different sample, but here's what it starts looking like after 58 days. Okay, coal is one of my favorites to look at when it comes to catastrophe in recent time. Not all coal, but a lot of coal has marine fossils in it. The scale of coal deposits is absolutely enormous. Way more than any amount of swampland that you could account for in present day. The purity of the coal seams, the flat contacts, everything about it spells catastrophe and recent, specifically because of the sheer amount of C14 you'll find in coal. There's exquisite preservation in it, and there's disarticulation, which is kind of an odd mix that you have both in these alleged peat bogs. That is the common go-to argument for deep timers for coal. And there's high biodiversity. Here's a photo of a coal seam, kind of exemplifying what I'm talking about. You see that absolute sharp contact delineating the coal from the rock below it. Doesn't look remotely like a swamp environment. That's pure, very thick coal that just starts and stops very suddenly in very flat contact with completely disparate types of rock. Here's another one. See the coal marker bed. They say thin coal seam near Helper, Utah. Note the flat upper and lower contacts. Same basic problem. The stratification that you can see there all through that, including the coal, immediately signals fluid flow like water. Here's some links to some of the content that I had. Here's one of the interesting things that I have discovered. I mean, I knew about this. Everybody, creationists who study this stuff know this fairly well. That what I did was I did a quick Google search, just typed in exactly what you see up there, older than we thought, without the quotes, without the ... But just literally dozens and dozens of articles that you can thumb through and see how they are shifting things around. Not all of these, I didn't put them all on here, but each one of these is a different article. But you can see here, National Science Foundation, the moon, 40 million years older than we thought. I'm highlighting that one. It has nothing to do directly with fossils, but we'll see why in a minute. Hyperallergic.com, human beings way older than we thought. Brighter Side News, the universe older than we thought. Space.com, the moon. This is why I brought it up, 100 million years. So we got one article that says 40 and another one says it's 100 million years older than we thought. This is the game you get into when you suppose deep time has anything to do whatsoever with the evidence that you find. It's just a thank you, just a game shifting dates around, and it has huge implications that we need to talk about. Huge implications on things like calibrating mutation rates and order, the very thing that we're here talking about today. You change the date of one thing, you are directly affecting the order that you thought you had established. There's more. Search this, did a quick search on this, evolved sooner than we thought. We'll get into this in a little bit since my time's up, so I will yield the floor. Thank you, Donny.
TRock, thank you very much for that opening statement. Gentlemen, that wraps up our opening statements for tonight's debate on the question, what best explains the order of fossils in the rock record? To the audience, I appreciate the engagement and the questions and challenges that have come in already. I am all caught up on those, and they are saved, and we will engage those in the audience Q&A period. Jackson Roe, we're now moving into a rebuttal, and our rebuttal consists of 8 minutes each to respond to our opening statements. Jackson, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. You got 8 minutes.
All right, you mentioned living fossils. I just wrote that down. I didn't really get to that point, but the common one is the coelacanth. There are 2 living species of coelacanths today. They've been around since the Devonian period. And from the Devonian to about the Cretaceous, there are like 80 of them that go through a lot of morphological change. But it's true that from the Cretaceous onward, they stay pretty modern. But I think most people don't realize there are about 100 known species, or even more than that, I don't remember, of coelacanths alone. Trackways, he mentioned trackways. They're in all layers of strata, most layers anyway, any major layer. You never find like a Dimetrodon with a mammal footprint together. You would think you would. And the formation of these footprints, it doesn't really make sense in light of a global flood. It makes sense in more of they walked through a muddy area, it dried in the sun, then it was covered over again, and these footprints were preserved. He mentioned some old DNA fragments. I didn't see how old they were, but I would suggest that a fossil like this, like a Cambrian trilobite, you would never get even a single base pair out of this. Maybe more recent than that, but how recent, I'm not sure. carbon-14 is made in the atmosphere all the time, and it trickles down through the rain. But the thing about it being in coal, they actually use coal for background tests in mass spectrometers to calibrate the machines, because most of it is totally lacking in carbon-14. Now, for this to make any sense, all coal would have to have carbon-14 for the Earth to be young. The fact that only some of it does is pretty indicative of that must have been contaminated. And I've spoken to the professor who runs the University of Irvine carbon-14 laboratory. I can't think of his name at the moment. So, but anyway, you can Google that, and I'm sure his name will pop up. He's an Australian-sounding guy, but he says that, yeah, it's in fact background contamination, because they even test empty sample holders, and it comes out, yeah, it's reading the background. There are a few particles of carbon-14 in there. It's reading that, and it's coming out, oh, this must be 60,000 years old. But actually, it's just background contamination. So oftentimes when you see something that says 60,000 years, it means there's so little carbon-14 in the sample that it can't be anything but the background of the machine. Now, coal fossils, that's true. I've found coalified brachiopod fossils this way. There are a bunch of them sitting on this table over here. Found them in the Atoka Formation here in Arkansas. It is strange they're made of coal, but there's more than one way to make coal. But the important thing I want to point out, all the brachiopods that I'm finding here are spirithids and orthotetes, which went extinct at the end of the Permian, and they'll never be found above that. But they're always found in these layers, these Paleozoic layers. Orthotetes is only found in Carboniferous, which is where this happened to be. So that's really all I've written down for what he got to, but I'm sure we'll get to more in the open discussion. So,
Jackson Roe, appreciate the rebuttal. I'll reset the timer, hand it back to TRock. TRock, just make sure to unmute yourself, and you have 8 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Donny. Thank you, Jackson. Jackson, I have a question for you. Shark teeth. You brought that up in the past, and I appreciate the effort to try and put something out there that's a really difficult challenge. This is, to me, not a terribly difficult challenge at all, but shark teeth. So your comment was that, I think in your slide you said several hundred years. It was north of 1,600 years to be precise. There should be shark teeth out there that get deposited very early in a worldwide flood process, right? But a couple problems with that are, number one, shark teeth today are still not everywhere in the ocean. Second part is the places that you do find shark teeth, what process put them there? If you just simply say, oh, there should be shark teeth there, well, first of all, you have to know where the sharks were. You have to know how many there were. You have to know what the climate was like, whether there should have been sharks in the region. You have to know what the geological mechanism was that put the sediments themselves there and brought the shark teeth with them. I don't think you've explained any of that. Sharks don't live on land. We find these shark teeth on land. They don't live on land. How did they get on land? So I'm going to suggest that your problem is actually two-way, because you've got shark teeth on the continents. Now, not being a paleontologist or a geologist, either one, I'm going to make a supposition here that I'm fairly confident is probably true. If you could go do very much fossil hunting offshore, you're probably going to find dinosaur fossils out there. And I know that the secular explanation for, marine fossils on the continents is that there were periods, there were epochs during this alleged vast history of the Earth where, for example, the Western Interior Seaway, we had these large bodies of water sitting on top of on top of the U.S., among other places, for extended periods of time. In any event, and that is the mainstream explanation for how you get marine fossils on the continents. and of course the creationists would say, yes, we know there was a big bunch of water on top of the continents at one time, but how did that water get there? And how do you justify having all of that and land animal fossils mixed in with some of it, and the two-way part that's problematic for evolution? How do you explain how you get dinosaur and land animal fossils offshore, just like you do coal? Coal is found offshore. That's not where they lived. The dinosaurs didn't live offshore from the current day continents. The continents only have one continental root mass underneath them. There is only evidence for them ever only having one. So when you go very far offshore, you're not finding where there used to be land. You're finding what has always been ocean. Angiosperms, pollen, bivalves, it's the same basic problem. You're arguing from a biological perspective instead of what put the fossils there. In order to answer, whether you should find angiosperms, you would have to already know something about the history. So kind of what the evolutionary viewpoint does is a very obscured version of circular reasoning, but you have to have already known the history to know why there should or shouldn't be angiosperms at any particular location. So part of the deal here is that today, as we live on the earth, there are ecosystems all over the entire globe that have distinct boundaries. And some of them kind of feather together so that there's a little bit of overlap and so forth. But as we live today, animals live in distinct boundaries. So in order for you to make an argument against a flood, you're basically going to have to come up with some proposed mechanism that says this flood should have taken two very disparate ecosystems and clashed them together and then put them on the continent and mix them up in the way that you're suggesting they should be. But where I live, guess what? There are no cheetah fossils where I live. Why not? Because cheetahs don't live here. There aren't going to be, because cheetahs have never lived here that I'm aware of. If there's a flood today in this area, there will still be no cheetah fossils here. And that can be said for any particular organism. You have to know where they lived before you can make an argument about whether they should be here or there. And actually on angiosperms in particular, because one PhD individual brought this up in a conversation with me on Donny's channel one time, brought up this very thing. There is actually potentially a very biblical explanation straightforward for this. And we'll talk about it later, because I know I'm kind of probably getting short on time here. Last thing I'll say, C14 background is exactly what is testable. And so when you say, well, some coal has C14 and some doesn't, or appears to have, put it that way, what Jackson did not elucidate is that today, whenever you do carbon-14 dating for recorded history, and we'll say, 300, 500, 1,000 years ago, whatever, or an acceptable range that carbon-14 is actually used during recorded history, is that where your sample comes from, what region of the globe it comes from, and other circumstances, what type of organism it is. Some plants today take in less C14 than others do. Some animals take in less C14 than others do. So when you see a disparity in C14 across coal samples in terms of the total amount that you might find, that's exactly what you get out of living biomaterial today. It's not different than that. So, and again, you can totally test for background. It's probably one of the easier things to do. So personally, I have never seen anything but a hand wave, oh, it must be background explanation, and not an actual data-driven test demonstrating it. And I will yield my time.
TRock, thank you very much for that roughly 8-minute rebuttal. Gentlemen, we're moving along smoothly. That concludes our opening statements and opening arguments. I appreciate you guys laying out your positions on the ordering in the rock record in terms of fossils from a creation position and an evolution one with Jackson. We're moving into a discussion. So we got plenty of points and arguments to discuss and to expand on. So I think this is going to be good. And I'm glad that we have a lot of time for free-flowing discussion. I'd like to make this discussion and debate in general a comprehensive one on this controversial issue here, the ordering of the fossil record. And so, gentlemen, let's jump into a discussion. What I want to do, though, is make sure that you both have more than enough opportunity to lead the way, ask the questions that you want to ask, and bring up the arguments that you want to bring up. So since TRock just ended with his rebuttal, Jackson Roe, let's give the floor to you first to pick topics and ask some questions. Go ahead, gentlemen.
All right. Well, he seems to say that like fossils are only found in like a few areas of the earth, and like some, well, certain fossils, not all fossils, obviously, but some like conodont species have a cosmopolitan distribution. Certain species can be found in certain layers all over the earth. Like there are some Ordovician species found in Ordovician rock all over the planet, North America, South America, Asia. And so to say that they're unique to one area, why like cheetahs are found here, but they're not that's true of some species, because not all species have been cosmopolitan throughout time. But how would you explain like a conodont species that's found in all the Ordovician layers all over the earth? I think you're muted. Oh, there you
go. So I think it goes without saying that some species are more populous on the globe than others, right? Like, sure. Are there more rabbits on the planet or more cats? My guess is there's probably a lot more rabbits. Mm-hmm. They live in the wild. They seem to be much more common in the wild than cats are in the wild. Here in North America, we have a handful of larger cat species here, but I can walk out on any given day and see rabbits all over the place, but even domesticated house cats that are typically taken care of, the ones that are feral, are very few compared to the rabbits. But essentially, that's the answer to your question. You're going to find some species are much more populous on the planet and therefore should have a much larger representation in the fossil record.
Well, there are about 30 different biozones, they call, of conodonts that match up with graptolites, which are these little fern-looking tiny little things. It's hard to explain what they are really, but they intersect at certain areas, and there are 30 of these zones, and it's used to characterize certain areas of the Ordovician period in particular. But,
so that's an interesting way to look at it. Mm-hmm. I mentioned lensing and wedging. You're familiar with what those are, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have a geological lean at all to your approach.
Mostly paleontological, but I know the basic geology.
Sure, but so you know what lensing is. Donnie, I'm going to share my screen one time real quick, and it'll be super brief. But I'm going to just show this so that everybody's kind of on board with what I'm. And it's weird. I apologize. I had to kind of throw it together very last minute. Although I'll talk about this a little bit because this is relevant to what Jackson is talking about. Lensing. So I apologize again for the very crude nature of this, but in the geologic column here, and I take it you can see this, Jackson.
Yeah.
So basically in the geologic column, it's very common that you see depositions that are kind of interlaced like this. And this is what I'm referring to when I say lensing or wedging. One of my previous debates, I basically brought up Ashley phosphate beds. So I'm going to stop sharing now. But anyway, I just wanted to make that clear what I was talking about. So when Jackson, whenever you say, okay, we find these various species, in this layer, and we find them in these eco zones here, and here, the problem with the argument and calling it the order, the absolute order over time, is that most of the geologic column in any particular place that you go, you're missing hundreds of millions of years. So if you say, for example, dinosaurs are always on top of trilobites, what does that mean? Some trilobites are at much higher elevation than dinosaurs are. And where you do find dinosaurs, there may be no representative Cambrian strata whatsoever underneath them. And when you know that the layers are interlaced like that, I'm back to my original question. When you say order, you've named the layers by the fossils in them, but you don't actually have you have a very specific sense of what order means to you. It doesn't mean elevation, because if it meant elevation, we'd be saying, yeah, we find lots of dinosaurs at lower elevation than trilobites. What mechanism put them there? That's the question. That's what determines what order they're in.
Well, you've heard of the Williston Basin in North Dakota. It's
Heard of it.
Yeah, it's they did a core sample. It's like it's basically an intact or mostly intact geologic column, and they find fossils in order. They've found like mosasaur teeth in the Mesozoic section, found conodonts in the Devonian, trilobites in somewhere in the Paleozoic. I don't remember exactly, but all these fossils that do line up like this. And so what do you think of a place like that?
So let me ask you this: when you look at those, when you look at that strata like that, what characteristic of that strata informs you that deep time has passed?
Well, in this particular one, I'm not sure about this one, but just the fact that everything's in this order is pretty suspect.
So you're appealing to the biology alone, like I said, but biology isn't what put the sediment there.
Right. I don't know too much about the geology of the Williston Formation. I just know about the relative order of.
Sure, I understand. So relative order. Now that's the common ground, probably, if there could be such thing, the common ground between the creation model and the evolution model. Basically, people like myself, if you tell me that this strata happened after this one, I'll believe you. Why? Because I know that the relative sequencing can be determined by simply looking at the physical nature of it as it sits in front of you. And so relative sequencing, absolutely. If you tell me, okay, I've never found a layer that happened after a layer that has trilobites in it, or after a layer that has dinosaurs in it, that has trilobites in it, okay. But then when you look at the actual fossil distribution and the geological distribution of the strata, you know that whole wedging thing that I was talking about? Mm-hmm. Have you ever stood on the shoreline at, say, at the coast by the ocean and watched waves come in?
Yeah.
You know what stream braiding is?
Not really familiar with that one, though.
Stream braiding is kind of what it sounds like. You know what braiding is, right? So stream braiding is specific in geology, and I'm not a geology expert at all, but stream braiding is basically where you have currents coming in and they interweave with each other as they flow in what I call more of a channelized fashion, where they're kind of come through a narrow passage. But it's called stream braiding, and there's distinct patterns in how the deposition starts to interfinger and ripple together. So anyway, the reason I bring this up is because in the fossil record, if you've stood on the coastline and watched waves come in, you've probably noticed that they actually have zones where they interlace together as they're coming in and out, because you can watch a wave come in and then you can see it all of a sudden get, I don't know how to say it, but it gets kind of interfered with all of a sudden by a new wave that came in with more energy. And you see the boundary zones between them, and you start seeing them kind of braid together a little bit in certain zones. And the reason I bring this up is because when you're looking at the fossil record and saying this relative sequence, that braiding is actually not just like this. It's not just one on top of another, but what it signals is a change in wave direction, right? But the other thing it does, they're actually interlaced this way in 3 dimensions where they cross into each other. And the geologic column is just like that. So what does that tell you about the order? What does that tell you about the process that put them there?
Well, I know that with graptolites and conodonts, they're in the same layer. I think I made it sound like they're kind of like wedged in with each other, but they're in these same layers.
I understand, but when you follow the layers out to where they actually do lens together with another layer, then how do you know which one actually happened first? When they are like this, it distinctly looks like they happened at the same time, but with different energy and slightly different timing as they run into each other. But this thing that I'm describing, it's actually not a phenomenon. It's actually fairly common. And so, like, I didn't get any good pictures because it's on the side of the highway and I couldn't stop, and I don't have a good camera anyway. But I'm driving down the highway and I see a coal seam going through the rock in a cut through. And one of the things that I noticed is a cloudy wedging between the layers like this, which tells me no deep time. The process that put them together was wave motion, where two waves came together like that, or like this. In some cases, you really do just see them like that. In some cases, you might see them kind of blended a little bit more. But the only thing that you can deduce from that in terms of how that deposition happened is that it happened kind of almost simultaneously and within a very short period of time.
Well, I have a thought on that. With the way you're saying it would have formed with waves and whatever, wouldn't that be a pretty 2D sheet of layer? I mean, some of these layers are, the size of states and thick, hundreds of feet thick. And if you're saying it formed by wave motion like this, I mean, it seems like that would take quite a bit of time to form on its own anyway.
Well, that's why I pointed you to the beach example, because it's a broader scale that you can still see in real time. It's broader than a stream or a creek, or however you want to think about that. What I'm calling channelized flow. Channelized flow is basically where you have a broader area that kind of gets funneled down and comes together. And there's a high amount of turbulence in there usually. But I point you to the coastal example because it's something that any individual can walk up to a coastline and see a broader scale version of that, where different waves come in at different times. And so, to answer your question or your comment there, the global scale is global in scale. The global flood is global in scale. That's why they're so big, and that's why you have to go so far on any particular formation before you start finding where the wedging places are. And I didn't get to do it, and I apologize. I went looking for it and I couldn't find it. But are you familiar with Tim Clary?
Say again, with who?
Tim Clary.
The name's familiar.
He works for ICR. He's a geologist. He worked in oil and gas for a long time. As a petroleum engineer and geologist, I believe. But anyway, he has put together oil well data on all 7 continents. And basically what I'm describing to you, this interfingering and interwedging of the different layers across the globe, you find them in core samples. The reason people in the origins discussion don't talk about it much is because most of that data is actually kept under lock and key by big oil companies, because they don't want to share their data with competing interests for financial reasons. So we don't get to see it much. But Tim Clary has actually brought, having been in that industry, he was able to put a bunch of that core sample data together and actually lay out much more comprehensive maps for fossil and geology distribution across the planet. What I'm describing to you is very, very common. It's the norm.
Okay. Are you familiar with the conodont alteration index?
No.
Okay. Well, basically, they can take conodont teeth from samples of strata, and they can heat them up to certain temperatures, and they turn a certain color based on what conditions they formed under. And there's a scale, and they can use this reliably to find places where oil formed. Now, if all of this happened in one global flood, why would the temperatures of the formations of everywhere be so different and correlate like this?
I apologize, but I'm going to have to turn the question around. Why would they all be the same?
because it was one event, one pretty quick event.
So what you're highlighting, Jackson, is a super common error in, I don't know how to say it, but basic physics. If there's a volcano offshore somewhere, and so you get this big hot magmatic plume that comes out of it into the ocean, it's going to heat the ocean, right?
Sure.
But the ocean is huge, and the volcano is a tiny speck. How long do you think it should take for that heat to get distributed across the globe?
I don't know, but why would
It doesn't. The point is that the Earth is so big. Any of these localized events, there's not enough time to mix everything kind of the way you've sort of suggested. Other people have very specifically suggested that this one event should just mix everything up, like as if you put alphabet soup in the bathtub and just stirred it up real hard. How is it that is physically possible on a globe this size? Water is incompressible. So when waves come in, all they do is push other water with it, which means you push an eco-zone with it. The whole thing moves. That's what the incompressibility of nature of water is. So how could you get all this mixing that you're alleging to?
Well, why would the temperatures where oil is found correlate to events like volcanoes?
I'm not saying that they do correlate specifically to volcanoes. I mean, is that your idea, or do you think that's what I think, or do you?
Well, no, I'm just saying, why would it correlate to any one specific temperature like that?
Well, because the slides that I was showing, I'll be honest with you, I don't know exactly what you're getting at with this, but if you're looking for, some sort of chemical / temperature signature in these strata through the fossils or the minerals and the geology, whatever, but if you're looking for some sort of signature like that, the slides that I was showing earlier that John Mackay has put together on how to form coal, what you find out is that it's very much a chemical reaction. And so a lot of chemical reactions, I'll say maybe most of them, heat is actually a catalyst for.
Mm-hmm.
And having been in the tree industry myself, and I know a little bit about cutting fresh vegetation, plants actually put off heat whenever you cut them and grind them.
Sure.
And so the fact that you're following a heat signature through the rocks, to me, is completely meaningless to determining how much time has passed. You're describing basically what's explained by chemistry.
Well, what do you think about the pollen argument that I brought up about why wouldn't there be pollen in the Precambrian world? Or
so,
for that?
Yeah, the pollen's a great one. I actually, I'll be honest with you, I hate to say people's names, that aren't actually in the conversation, so I'm not going to say any names, but the person that I interacted with on this very topic had a PhD in biology, and I definitely respect people who have made it to that level, but he brought that up, and he caught me off guard. I'll be honest with you, he caught me off guard at the time, but after walking away from that conversation, it dawned on me basically what I've already said to you today. You have to know something about the history of the Earth in order to explain why you should or shouldn't see, any particular organism in any particular location. There are distinct boundaries on ecozones, right?
Sure, but with pollen, that's not a great explanation, because pollen can blow across whole continents, blow across.
No, that's a fair observation. And so what occurred to me, though, is in the biblical worldview, we do have the pre-flood history. We have enough to kind of piece together some pretty important details. And on this very topic, have you read the book of Genesis?
Yes, I have.
Have you put a fair amount of focus on the first 6 or 8 chapters?
Yeah, I want to say I did. Yeah.
So there's an interesting thing that actually is described in Genesis that may have, and I'm not offering this as an absolute answer, but it may have explanatory power here. So you're talking about flowering plants, angiosperms, and pollen, that kind of thing, right? So are you familiar with who Cain is?
Yeah.
Do you know the curse that was put on him?
Right. Yeah. Cain and Abel. Yeah.
What was the curse that was put on Cain?
He lived forever, a mark on his head, something like that. Right?
Specifically, the curse was that the ground would not bring forth for him.
Right.
And his response was, my punishment's more than I can bear. People are going to kill me. Right. Do you remember any of that detail?
A little bit.
What that strongly alludes to is that wherever Cain went, he said he would be a vagabond in the earth. You know what that means, right? He's just a traveling wanderer, right? Well, if he had this curse on him that the ground wasn't going to bring forth, and he was a traveling wanderer that everywhere he went, the ground was cursed and people wanted to kill him for it, that strongly alludes to the idea that, I mean, again, I'm not dogmatic about this at all, but it does strongly allude to the idea that wherever Cain went, plants would not grow. And if he lived for 600, 800, 900 years, like many individuals named in the pre-flood world did, he had a chance to affect a lot of the planet, and plants may not have been growing the way you think they should have been. But in order for you or I, either one, to know that, we have to already know the history of the earth before we say what the history was, right?
Right. But I feel like even if he's in 100 square miles around and doesn't grow, the next one over does, and the pollen's going to blow over there anyway. You know?
For how long? For how long? Cain is very early in the creation.
Mm-hmm.
How far spread were the plants that you're alleging should have been there?
Well,
it's another detail you would have had to have already known, but Cain lived very early in the creation account, long before the flood. So he would have had time to affect a huge portion of the planet, possibly even faster than the plants could spread.
Right, but if he affected everything, no one would have had any food. So surely some plants were producing pollen, and it was getting spread somewhere, you know?
Well, there is pollen in the fossil record, right?
Yeah, there is, but not in the Precambrian.
So that's an interesting point. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a pollen expert, but I want to show you something. And if Donnie can share my screen again, I want to show you something very interesting that I found.
I think you made a note that he'll be back in a few minutes. I think it was.
Well, that's fine. I won't be able to share it right away. I won't be able to share it right away, but
He said 5 minutes. That was 6 minutes ago. So I don't know where he is.
Okay, no problem. I'll describe to you what it is that I found. Okay. So those slides I showed where I typed in older than we thought, evolved sooner than we thought. So when I went looking for that, what do you think it implies every time somebody in the scientific literature suggests something is older than we previously thought?
Well, an earlier fossil was found. It does happen quite a bit, but not within reason.
What do you
never find?
What do you think that implies about the overall order of evolution?
Well, we couldn't possibly know the entire fossil record all together, and that's probably going to keep happening, you know. And so it will always be incomplete. I mean, we'll never know the full record.
Are you holding out hope to find rabbits in the Cambrian?
I mean,
it's a joke.
For something aquatic in the Cambrian.
But let me show you what I found here. So here's one particular article. This is from Natural History Museum. Land plants supposedly 100 million years earlier than we thought. Land plants, 100 million years.
I actually have a Cooksonia fossil back here. It's one of the earliest land plants, Cooksonia. And the interesting thing about these is they're very small. They're kind of a transitional between non-vascular and vascular plants, and their spores are very distinctive. All spores are pretty distinctive. And where you find these plants, and you only find their spores in the Silurian early Devonian, which is where they're found also, which I think is strange. I have the fossil back
again,
here. But
I'm back where I was a while ago, though. What do you think adjusting the time scale for any particular organism by 100 million years does to the alleged order of the fossil record?
Well, if it was like mammoths appeared 100 million years earlier than we thought, that would be a real shocker. But if it's land plants, that's not. There's a lot more wiggle room for those, I think.
Well, that's because the more modern the species, the shorter the more modern the species as conveyed by evolution, the narrower the time frame.
Well, if you told me
but
TRock, were you looking? I was wondering if you were looking to screen share. TRock, were you looking to screen share some? Yeah, you can hit present if you'd like, and I can put that up on the screen.
I hadn't hit my deal. I deferred to.
As you're doing that, TRock, take your time. To the audience, I am all caught up on your questions and your challenges. Feel free to continue sending those in, as we do want to keep this comprehensive. And so if you got questions or clarification, objections, TRock, I think you're okay. You're good. Go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah, we're here.
You guys have cut out really bad, Donnie.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so I think you can see my screen now, right, Jackson?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So I moved this tag. This tag was actually over this one because it was directly related to it. But this is the one I was citing: 100 million years for land plants from natural. 100 million years earlier. As a matter of fact, the title "Plant Life on Earth is Much Older Than We Thought." 100 million years. This one below it, though, is one I wanted to focus on because of your mention of pollen. So lifescience.com, green algae. Green algae are members of the plant kingdom that emerged at least 1 billion years ago, but new finding which shows that a diversity of modern-looking algae species existed earlier than thought may push back the origin of the plant kingdom perhaps another 100 million years. The researchers reported on September 21st. The ancient algae are surprisingly complex and almost identical to a modern genus of seaweed called Codium. So here's one of my issues that I mentioned earlier, Jackson. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with fossil calibrations for mutation rates?
Yeah. And I was about to bring that up.
At least. So if you summarily change the origin timeline by 100 million years, what do you think that does to fossil calibrations for mutation rates?
Well, the interesting thing about the land plant, they were known to be older from molecular data, but the fossils had so far been Silurian. So they're thought to be probably Ordovician, or even maybe earlier than that. But the fossils aren't for the Cambrian, at least, lacking for plants. But I think they may have found some spores in Ordovician rock actually now.
So yeah, that's kind of my point, though. But what does that do if you say that the fossils existed at such and such a time, therefore our mutation rate for a specific species or family or genus or whatever is supposed to be X number of mutations per 1,000 years or however it is that you want to quantify it? What do you think shifting the origin of the timeline by 100 million years does to that? I mean, can you appreciate how interweaved this story is and how quickly it becomes
in this case, didn't do anything because the molecular data already predicted that fossils would be found a little earlier for this.
Then why did they say 100 million years older than we thought?
Well, what was the source on that? I didn't even see. I didn't register.
Live Science.
live science? Well,
Yeah.
it's a headline. You'll find when they say, "Oh, this upturns everything,"
This is called.
changes everything. They say that quite a bit.
It says
And it's really
oldest 3D green algae fossil.
Mhm.
But I mean, what I'm pointing out here is that when you look at things like mutation rates and you compare it to things like fossil order and calibrations for mutation rates, and even extend that out and compare it to, radiometric dating, all of a sudden everything looks like it's coming unraveled, because you can't just summarily start changing the order of when things, or the timelines when things appeared, without affecting all the other fields that are interwove with it.
Well, from what I've read, biostratigraphy, molecular data, and all of this seems to line up pretty well most of the time. And so I'm not sure what studies you're referring to completely, except for the one you showed just now.
Yeah, like I said, all you have to do is type in a simple internet search, older than we thought or evolved sooner than we thought, and just dozens and dozens and dozens of different articles, completely different from each other, come up.
Sure.
But let me ask you this, because we're talking about, so in order for you to establish, because you're arguing from a biological perspective on trying to explain what's clearly a physical nature of the strata, what do you think when you see, have you seen the interview with Mary Schweitzer and Barbara Walters?
I haven't seen that interview, no.
I'll be honest with you, I'm surprised. So how it's just bizarre to me that people who dogmatically support evolution are not familiar with this. Because
well, I am familiar with it. I just haven't seen the interview.
Right, but this particular interview was, I mean, it was world news. Basically, it was 60 minutes, but that's broadcast worldwide. And back at the time that actually happened, the three major networks were much more popular in terms of global population and familiarity than they are now, because now we have so much mass media that people don't necessarily focus on one.
Well, Mary Schweitzer herself keeps saying that this is not evidence that the Earth is young.
Okay, but that's not an argument. That's not a scientific argument. That's an argument that's a personal opinion.
She's the one who's found it. I mean, she surely knows a little more about it than me or you.
But my question to you is, when you see, have you seen the deal where they actually take tweezers and stretch like a rubber band a piece of dinosaur tissue?
They debated an acid bath to get it loose like that. It was
sure, but how do you suppose that thing remained elastic like that for 67 million years?
Technically, it didn't. They had to treat it. But if there's no DNA in it, there's not a shred of DNA in any of this stuff. And you would think if it was 10,000 years old, there should be plenty of DNA in it. So, I mean, I find that to be problematic, because in, like, say, mammoths, you'll find some fragmentary DNA. But you find T-Rex material, there's never any DNA in it.
Actually, that's not true.
Like, so how much DNA?
Well, that's what I directly mentioned earlier. If you have, every single cell in your body has a copy of your DNA in it, right?
Except red blood cells.
So if you have a cell that has been preserved, and in order for Mary Schweitzer to have a sample that you can actually stretch and elongate and snap back like that, it's got original cells in it. And obviously they're
not necessarily cells in
it. But they look like actual pieces of muscle tissue. And
they might
they look like blood cells too.
But
and they look like blood vessels.
Red blood cells, there's no DNA in red blood cells.
But the question or the comment that I've made earlier was that I'm not suggesting you're finding long strands by any stretch. The reports that I've seen, there is a specific test done for it, and it's basically a chemical test where you get a reaction and you see a color change in the chemistry based on a reaction to the DNA strand, the DNA molecules. And so what they're suggesting is 3 to 6 base pairs at the very longest. And so, no, again, I'm not trying to make any grandiose claims here. I'm just saying that, yes, DNA molecules are still present because they have been tested for and shown to be there. But again, where is deep time obvious in any of that?
Well, obviously, I think it's apparent that more time has passed with a T-Rex sample than a mammoth sample, because in mammoths, in almost every frozen mammoth, you can find pretty long strands of DNA. I don't remember the length, but it's longer than 2 or 3 base pairs. I mean, to the point where they can almost build a genome out of it. Almost, not quite.
I hate to point out the obvious, but what you're describing is like saying that a piece of raw hamburger meat laying on the sidewalk should decompose at the exact same rate that a piece of hamburger in the freezer should. It's obvious they're in 2 completely different environmental contexts, and temperature has everything to do with it.
You know why T-Rex have never been found in the snow, in the glaciers? It's because they didn't live in the Ice Age.
It's because they don't live in cold climates. They're not known to have ever lived in cold climates.
Well, they came down to like almost to Arkansas, where I am.
You know what? We call them woolly mammoths, right?
Yeah, sure.
They've got hair all over, very thick hair all over their bodies, and they're made to live.
Utyrannus had very thick feathers, and it lived in a fairly cold climate, they believe.
Very thick feathers.
8-inch feathers, yes.
Okay, but
I know that's a contentious subject with creationists, but
yeah. Birds with actual feathers are suitable for living in cold climates.
All right. Something you would consider a bird, maybe Endogenous, which had feathers. Why would that not be found in the ice?
Because they didn't live there during that time?
Well, it lived in a similar environment as Utyrannus, they think, the Taoji-Shan Formation, about the late Jurassic.
So the Ice Age is kind of interesting because we are talking about the order of the fossil record, right? And so there are 2 distinct events, even in the secular view, they are 2 very distinct events, right?
Yeah, they would be.
What caused the Ice Age in the first place?
I'm not a climatologist. I couldn't answer specifically.
Well, the secular explanation has to do with the Milankovitch cycle and all that, and it's it's another untestable hypothesis that's rooted in very bad math and circular reasoning. But if you want precipitation to happen today, one of the quickest ways to do it is to mass evaporate the oceans, right?
Let me give you another example that's similar to the glacier, but tar pits. They can be found in fairly tropical environments. I mean, there's one in LA.
Okay.
You pull tons of hundreds of direwolf skulls out of it. Okay. Not a single dinosaur, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, not anything from there. I mean, this is
why would you expect there to be any particular species there?
Well, I would think that if all these animals were living in around a similar time, probably in a similar climate, that maybe a Dimetrodon fell into at one point.
But if you wind back the biblical model, you're arguing from within my worldview, you don't have a logical reason to make that assumption, because in the biblical model, 2 of every unclean kind and 7 pairs of every clean kind were brought onto the ark, and there was a repopulation event that had to happen, and which means there's a redistribution that had to happen. And I would naturally assume that just like today, you don't find iguanas in the mountaintops of Canada, right?
Right.
But even animals that can live in a broad variety of places don't always live in zones that they're suitable for anyway. That's just the nature of biological distribution. And I'm back to where I was earlier. You have to have already known something about the history to know why there should or shouldn't be in your case, I think what you're alluding to, why aren't there dinosaurs in the tar pits? Because they didn't live in the area?
But Ice Age megafauna. There's Ice Age megafauna and some stuff like that in the tar pits. Nothing else.
Sure. But then you have to know
thousands of species on Earth. Surely one of them intersected in that area.
Why?
I mean, it's just the odds of it are pretty high. I think that of thousands of species of whatever Mesozoic, Paleozoic, they cross paths in that area.
Again, this is one of the strengths of the biblical worldview, because we do have details about the pre and post flood world. And so at the end of the flood, whenever Noah and company got off the ark, you know, it's fairly easy to assume that they just opened the door and let the animals run off and do their own thing, right? But Noah and his family were obviously very meticulous animal keepers. And I am very confident that Noah knew which environments, which animals should thrive in. I'm also very confident that if he had carnivores on the ark, for example, he wouldn't just turn them loose alongside the deer and let them have at it. He would stage out their distribution and put them where he thinks that each individual species, he saved them for a reason, carnivores included, the big cats, the dogs, whatever. He saved them for a reason. He didn't save them so they could just run off and eat each other right after they got off the ark.
So Noah released the megafauna into the LA area.
Well, again, you're kind of stuck in this thing where you're assuming a history. I don't know the history. What I'm pointing out is that some of the animal distribution may have been very intentional. And it may be that Noah decided, hey, we're not taking dinosaurs to what is now North America. Where exactly was that at the end of the flood? I couldn't really tell you. But he may have very well planned, no, we're not taking reptiles of this type to that area, and just not took them.
That's another thing about, there really is no explanation for how the dinosaurs or anything else went extinct, because they would have had to have been on the ark also. So at what point did that happen, do you think?
Well, so history. What history actually happened in extinction? You're talking about extinction. Mm-hmm. Extinction in the fossil record tells you there is nothing obvious about extinction in the fossil record. That's the primary point. When you find the last instance of a fossil, you have no idea whether that was an extinction event or not. All you know is you
can be pretty sure some areas are.
How?
Well, like the Permian Triassic or the KPG boundary, those are pretty obviously extinction events.
How is it obvious that you can know that every single one of that particular species on the entire globe is dead? That's what extinction is. How can you know that?
Dying there, you can assume it looks like they all about died in this area. Maybe some lingered on a bit longer, but they never appear beyond that.
Well, that brings us back to something we've talked about before. You brought up coelacanths. I think you may have been one of the ones that pointed out that, coelacanths are found from 300 million years ago.
They are, yeah.
And then there's a hiatus up until about 65 million years ago, 70 million years ago.
No, that's not what I said. There's about 100 species between the Devonian and the Cretaceous. 100.
No, okay, but in the early days, there was one example or a small handful of examples of coelacanths being found, and they were assigned an age of somewhere in the 65, 70 million year deal. And then later somebody found one that was 300 million years. And you've got less speciation difference, less phenotypical difference between those two than you do between a Chihuahua and a Great Dane for 230 million years.
That's not necessarily true. There was one that had this big blunt head and was about, the size of this room compared to the ones today. So there has been some change.
But the whole purpose, of course there has, but there's change that happens in real time and simultaneously across the globe now.
Sure.
So how can you default to deep time cause that whenever virtually no time can cause it today?
Well, I didn't necessarily that deep time caused that. I'm just saying that the way creationists often argue about coelacanths isn't entirely accurate.
Well, the greater point, though, is that you can have hundreds of millions of years with less speciation difference. You can have hiatuses from the fossil record. And then all of a sudden, and scientists in the literature think they're extinct until you find one alive. And then they're like, oh, wait, we were wrong. The point is, you cannot tell by last occurrence of a fossil whether an extinction event actually happened or not, because you don't know enough about the entire globe at that time to be able to say that.
So do you think we'll someday find like copsid trees and Cooksonia fossils or Cooksonia plants alive today?
I honestly don't know. Things do go extinct. And we all know that. But exactly when they go extinct, even today, is very difficult to tell. Even today in the media, while you're documenting it, it's very difficult to tell.
Sure. Yeah, so I go looking for extinct species all the time.
How much more difficult do you think it would be just by looking at a localized fossil bed, whether that was a true extinction event? If you can barely make sense out of it with recorded data today in real time in living extant species that are on the verge of extinction, how can you make any sense of it at all out of just localized fossil samples?
Well, some species today, this is kind of a tangent, but some species today, it's really hard to tell if they're extinct or not, but some of them, it's pretty obvious they are. Like the dodo bird, they're definitely gone. The thylacine, they're probably gone, Yeah. Mammoths, they're probably gone.
I'm going to shift gears real quick, though, because we're talking about this order thing and what causes the fossils to exist. Let me ask you this. How long do you think it takes to fossilize something?
Well, I think it depends really on the condition, but I've found I've found subfossils of Corellia shells in Kauai that still have color to them a little bit. Some of them don't have color, but some of them still have color. But they've been sitting there for, if we're going your way, at least a couple thousand years, right?
Right.
And I think they've been there longer, but either way, they're subfossils.
So can you give a range? Like, what do you think the shortest amount of time required and the longest amount of time required?
Well, I don't know if I'd put a number on it. I mean, people have, but the typical answer is like 1,000 years to fully fossilize something. Until then, it's stuck in an anaerobic environment and it's a subfossil.
Do you personally subscribe to that idea?
In some cases, I would. Like in the shells, they're definitely taking a while to fossilize completely.
So do you think the fossilization process is indicative of deep time?
Not necessarily, but I think the fossil
you think
record
it can be? Do you think it can be?
I don't even know if I'd say that really.
Well, that's my whole point from the very beginning. There's nothing obvious about deep time in the fossil record. But we talk about show and tell.
Maybe, but the fossil record itself, yes.
But the fossils, you don't get ages from the fossils.
No, not the fossils themselves.
No.
You would get that from with radiometric dating of layers between the fossils.
And so you've got a disparate connection that you're trying to make where you're saying the fossils are consistent with an old Earth, but you can't get the age from them, so you go to radiometric dating, but neither one of those tell you how the fossils got there in the first place. Neither one of them do.
No, it doesn't really need to.
Did you happen to bring anything to show?
Like a physical something?
Yeah.
I can grab something off the table here. Hang on a second. This is pretty cool.
Okay.
Hang on. Where is it? All right, this is pretty cool. It's not really related to the fossil record so much. It's just kind of a cool piece. This is a Papacetus tooth, which is a four-legged whale, actually. Which I know you guys don't subscribe to that, but that's what it is. Yeah.
We do believe in four-legged creatures, though. So.
Yeah.
So the reason I was asking this whole show and tell thing that I mentioned, and how long do you think it takes to fossilize? How long do you think 100% permineralization takes in a fossil that's, say, the size of your hand?
I mean, I think it would vary under certain conditions. I don't think you could put an exact number.
Can you give a minimum?
1,000 years, 500 years, something in there. I would
somewhere
say
in there. Okay.
probably.
So I happen to have a fossil here, and I'll say before I show this, one of the reasons I brought this up, because you hear creationists occasionally say that you have to have rapid burial to get fossilization or preservation, right? Do you agree with them or disagree with them?
There are certain instances where you don't need to be rapid. It can be a fairly slow process.
You think fossils can form slowly? And
not
forming
not super slowly, but yeah,
specifically forming slowly without complete burial.
Possibly, yes.
Okay, I'll be honest with you. That is it's a common creationist argument. I do not agree with it. So I've got, kind of a spoiler alert for creationists who make that argument that you have to have rapid burial to get preservation, especially of soft tissue and things like the dinosaur trackways, for example. But I've actually got a working example here where you don't have to have rapid burial to get 100% permineralization of soft body fossils. Let me show you what I got.
All right.
Can you tell what that is?
No, I can't tell what that is. What is that?
That is, in redneck terms, a cow patty.
Oh, really?
What I want you to take note of is this thing is solid stone. Like, it's heavy. It is solid stone, but it's in its original size, shape, and texture. And this was not buried. This is not an example of a fossilization that happened due to burial. And the reason you know that is because if it had been buried and then fossilized, it would have been encased in stone. And if it had been encased in stone, to get it out, you'd have had to chip all that stone away from it. It had all been bonded together. And this thing wouldn't look nearly this pristine with original texture and shape in it, right? See the inside of it? Look at that.
Yeah.
It looks like, I don't know exactly what that is, but it looks like maybe clumps of grass that weren't 100% digested, maybe. But what do you think preserves a fossil like that? What process preserved that in such pristine shape?
Assuming that's a cow patty, maybe it got baked in the sun for a long time. I'm not sure how that would happen.
Well, and this takes me back to the, we're talking about the order, right? And I keep saying it's not, biology doesn't tell you the order. The process that captured the fossils explains the order. And the sequence, you get what you get from whatever was wherever, whenever the event happened. That's what you get. So you have to know where any one organism should have been in order to explain why they should or shouldn't be there. And you have to know very specifically what the mechanism was. In this case, the one thing that is very obvious is that your explanation of baking in the sun is completely wrong, because whenever a cow patty like that sits in the sun, it dries and then it starts cracking. And then the next thing you know, insects are burrowing into it, grass is growing through it, all kinds of weird things are happening, and it's falling apart very quickly. But the original, I'm telling you, the original texture, go look at a fresh cow patty, and this is like a perfectly captured volume and texture of a fresh cow patty. How did that happen? What was the process? I'll tell you what I think it was. And how recent was it? If it's a cow patty, how recent was it?
Pretty recent. It's cow patty.
Probably, but in your paradigm, you would have bovine animals, 1 million years ago, right?
Sure, you would have.
But there were no people in North America herding cows 1 million years ago, right?
No, there wasn't.
Well, so what was the process? The process that caused that, what I think, is that cow was basically near a puddle or a farm pond. You ever seen the water in Oklahoma, the ponds in Oklahoma? You ever seen the clay in Oklahoma?
Yeah, the muddy little ponds there on the farm.
Yeah. So thinking what probably happened there was a cow dropped that in a muddy puddle or a shallow part of a farm pond or something. And basically that soft tissue just absorbed clay and minerals in the water very rapidly. And then the water, you can actually, if you look at this, you can see little ridges going across, parallel ridges like this, that looks like the water basically dried out and just slowly dried out and basically until this was exposed in air, indicated by those little ridge lines that are in there. And anyway, the point is that it had to happen very, very quickly. And the entire fossil record has evidence of something happening quickly and usually very recent. That dark patch in there, I would totally not be surprised in that light patch if you found C14 in this.
I wouldn't be surprised if you found C14 in that either, judging that it's recent, probably, and been in water.
But that's perfectly consistent with the biblical explanation of the history of the world in a short timeline. But I can also go to coal samples and find original biomaterial. That's what coal is. You ever seen where coal seams actually hiss gas out of them?
I haven't seen that, no.
That is a known hazard for coal miners in both open pit and shaft mining. It's a known hazard. That gas, that methane that comes through there today in allegedly, 60, 80, 300 million year old coal, you've got gas hissing out of there that's flammable. And so you get explosions sometimes from this stuff. How is that even remotely possible if the ground has been sitting there going through, geological processes of earthquakes and volcanoes and tornadoes and, weather changes, the expansion and contraction of the ground due to thermal cycles and water and all that stuff? How is that even remotely possible that hasn't all just busted up and let all that gas out millions of years ago?
I don't know much about the geology of coal seams, but I know that. Well, I would think that there's other processes that can make methane gas.
I'm sure there are.
Yeah,
I'm sure there are. But that was one of the highlights of John Mackay's work, is he's showing that those coalified samples that he's making by simply putting water, clay, and plant material, it makes methane.
Mm-hmm.
So it's expected to find lots and lots of very pure methane. And what you would not expect is multiplied hundreds of millions of annual cycles where you have earthquakes and stuff like that. Even if you're arguing for all this stuff, what just miraculously happened to every coal seam?
Well, like I said, most coal doesn't have carbon-14 in it. I've talked to scientists who work on the mass spectrometers themselves, and they all say this.
Did you acknowledge that not all plants have the same amount of carbon-14 today?
Sure, but there would be something, right? And most of it's completely carbon-14 dead.
Well, that's an interesting question. Should be, and I'll be honest with you, I totally do not believe that there is zero carbon-14 in some coal. I totally do not believe that. But I think what you're describing is there's much less in some than others, perhaps. But then again, that's modern observation of living plants have that same dynamic. So I'm not terribly surprised. There's been approximately 1 carbon-14 half-life transpired since the beginning of the Earth in the creation history, right? But the other thing that's happened is the magnetic field has weakened by 16-fold since the beginning of the Earth, which means as you dial the clock back to flood week, the magnetic field was much stronger, and all carbon-14 production in the atmosphere was much lower than today.
Are you familiar with paleomagnetism?
Sure.
Yeah, like in the seafloor spreading, the ferrite would be north-south one way, another way, sure, showing that it's been shifting over time.
How do you date paleomagnetism?
Well, I think it lines up with radiometric dating as well. But my point is not that the age necessarily, but that the intensity changes. It's not just going downhill.
Well, you're stuck in this disjointed connection that you're trying to make. Paleomagnetism doesn't have a date. It doesn't tell you how much time has transpired since a reversal.
Even if it doesn't have a date on it, it's showing fluctuations. It's not just a straight downhill.
This is the same problem you have with the fossils, though. So you're appealing to radiometric dating to tell you how much time went on during this, these changes in the paleomagnetism. You're relying on radiometric dating to tell you that, but radiometric dating has nothing whatsoever to do with how those reversals happen.
No, it doesn't. It can show the age of when this happened, but that's not really my point. My point is that the Earth's magnetic field is not just going downhill.
It is.
It is.
It
now.
is absolutely. We have. Whoa! Say that again.
It is now, but evidence in paleomagnetism shows it's been fluctuating.
No, that's not. I mean, I know this isn't necessarily your field of expertise, but we had a pretty detailed, me and one other person had a pretty detailed conversation on this, and that person actually went to a geophysicist for an explanation. And you know what the explanation he walked away with was? What? Earth's magnetism does weird things. And so my point is that if you actually follow the physics on electromagnetism, there are two ways to reverse poles in a magnetic field. Do you know what they are?
What are they?
One of them is to switch the direction of the current, but nothing in the earth is just going to summarily change the direction of any electrical current that's flowing through the earth. You have to have the other process is you literally physically move the body that holds the magnetic field. You have to actually move it. Well, the body that holds the magnetic field is not the magma that you find the paleomagnetism in. The body that holds the magnetic field is the core of the earth, the iron nickel core of the earth.
Right.
So something had to move in relationship to that. That's completely independent of radiometric dating, and it tells you nothing about how much time has passed. You have to know the process that caused the magnetic field changes. And the other point to make there is that whenever you reverse a field in a soft body magnet, or they're technically permanent magnets whenever they hold their own magnetic field without having to induce current into them. But anyway, whenever you take a magnet and you heat it up, you weaken the magnetic field.
Well, the Earth is a dynamo
magnet. That's exactly what I'm describing to you. That's what they say, but you have to have a pretty serious mechanism. Whenever you reverse the magnetic field, you weaken it. You don't sustain it, you weaken it.
The Earth is a dynamo magnet, though.
No. The alleged mechanism for that is supposed to be that through subduction, you're basically pulling material down and basically recycling the mantle to create this dynamo. The problem is that the half-life of the Earth's magnetic field is so much slower than the movement of this alleged subduction process. It's way too the half-life of the magnetic field is way too fast. The mantle isn't moving fast enough.
Normal, like permanent magnet, you mean?
Well, I'm talking specifically because the Earth's iron core is a permanent magnet of sorts. Its half-life has been measured, and it's about 1,600 years, and it's way, way too short of a half-life to be regenerated by any very slow alleged mantle movement. That will not sustain it. And you've got the heat problem because, again, heat completely destroys magnetism.
Heat would destroy a permanent magnet, yes, but not a dynamo magnet.
Your dynamo isn't moving fast enough, and you have too much heat at the same time. What you're trying to tell me is
there a magnetic field at all, because it's thousands of degrees down there. Any magnet that's not a dynamo magnet would stop working.
Well, because it's only 6,000 years old, first of all. Second of all,
it would stop working instantly at that temperature.
Huh? No, it's a function of the mass and the specific iron content that's in it. That's you wouldn't know that unless you could do those calculations.
Thousands of degrees, it's going to just conk out immediately. A permanent magnet may be a little slower than like a superconducting magnet, but it's pretty fast.
I would suggest that you take an actual iron magnet and do a few basic tests to see how strong the magnetic field is, and then heat it up and then check the magnetic field again and tell us what happened.
I'll heat it up to 1500 degrees, and then we'll see how it works after that.
It's the worst. The Earth's core is the worst possible scenario you can imagine. Your dynamo is too slow and the heat is too high to appeal to any millions of years timeline.
So what is the Earth's magnet if it's not a dynamo magnet? It can't be a permanent magnet.
Why can't it?
It's too hot.
Its sheer mass will hold the magnetism for a very long time.
Okay.
If you take a little small handheld magnet and heat it up to what the Earth's mantle is, sure, you might completely obliterate the magnetic field, but the Earth's core is way, 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 way bigger than that. The mass alone will
literally 2,000 something degrees. I mean, I don't think the mass matters if the whole thing is that hot.
I will also add to that too, though, that again, this is something you would have to know the history, and I'll be the first to tell you the Bible doesn't give you these kinds of details, so we don't know the history any better than you do on this particular point. But if you've got this very hot layer underneath the crust of the Earth, you don't necessarily know that it was hot like that for the first 1656 years before the flood. That heat may have been induced specifically by the moving of the continents.
Well, I don't see how there wouldn't be heat. It's the pressure is creating it, and if the Earth had been the same mass the whole time, it would always be hot.
That's fair, but how hot, how much mass, and how much iron? You have to know all those details to know how long the magnetic field should last for our particular scenario. And I don't, to my knowledge, nobody has ever done that, because the physicists who have tried to do that basically run into a brick wall explaining how we even have one at all specifically in a billions of years timeline. If you can't explain it in a 6,000 year time frame, you sure can't explain it in a 4.5 billion year timeline.
Not with a permanent magnet, no.
That's what it is.
It's not.
It's just a ball of iron.
Yeah,
any ball of material that holds its own magnetic field is a permanent magnet.
Yeah, but it's not like a refrigerator magnet. It's a spinning iron nickel ball.
Do you know how fast it would have to spin? Yeah, and what you're describing, this dynamo thing you spin, it's what they call a differentially rotating core. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
You've heard, you know what I'm talking about? The Earth does not have a differentially rotating core. The fact that if you appeal to a 4.5 billion year timeline, it's kind of like take a bucket of water and spin it around in circles on its vertical axis and watch the water start swirling. And then what happens when you set it down? The water slows down like really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And
how much water are we talking? And how big is the core?
Well, pay attention to the reverse of that, though. If you pick the bucket up after sitting still and you start turning it, the water starts turning with the bucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
The water actually moves with the bucket due to fluid friction. And so if the Earth is sitting there spinning like this, the core is going to spin with it. It's got much more friction in it than there is between the water and the bucket. There's too much friction, too much physical interference. The core is moving with the crust of the Earth together. They're not spinning separate from each other.
And the Earth spins.
The sun has a different
24 hours, but it spins a little more.
The sun has a differentially rotating core, which is another conundrum, because just like the bucket of water thing, the core should be rotating with the outer layers of the sun as well because of fluid friction, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we're talking about order of the fossil record, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I can't help but ask you again, where do you see deep time in the fossil record?
The best place for me, anyway, well, I haven't seen it in person, but the Permian-Triassic boundary, I think, is a good place to start. You see a bunch of. Say again.
Do you have any diagrams?
No, I don't have any diagrams of it, but you find spores again. I'm bringing up spores. along this boundary that are all deformed for some reason. And they think that's because the ozone layer was compromised from the shield volcano that evidently erupted at this time from geologic evidence. And you wouldn't expect that. That's just one of many evidence. I'm just bringing that one up. But you wouldn't expect that if this wasn't an event that happened in a certain time period.
Okay, so shield volcano. Do you think that does not fit in a young Earth model?
I didn't say that. I just said that's what.
Well, the point in asking, I know you didn't say that, but the point in asking is that you got to have something that differentiates specifically between deep time and very recent time, like 6,000 years. And a shield volcano basically only tells you catastrophe.
Mm-hmm. It would have had to have been a pretty long-term catastrophe for a shield volcano. They were up for quite a long time, as far as anyone can tell.
How long?
I don't know. Somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of years, maybe. Like a long time. These things will stay erupting. Well, which of course is preposterous to someone, obviously, but but
I mean, you're back on physical mechanisms again, because it's kind of like, I don't know a better way to describe it, but maybe you think about like a hockey puck sliding across the ice.
Mm-hmm.
Do you play hockey?
No, I don't play hockey.
I don't either, but most people can relate. If you take your hockey stick and sling a hockey puck across the ice, what does it do?
Slows down eventually, right?
Eventually it slows down. But what if you had something that weighed 10 times as much as a hockey puck and you sent it at the same velocity?
Slows down a little sooner.
No, it'd take longer, right?
Longer, right? Whatever.
Due to the mass, it'd take longer. But the bottom line is it slows down over time, and that energy dissipates. In 100,000 years, who has ever tested or observed a volcano lasting that long? The energy dissipates way too fast to appeal to that type of timeline. Energy dissipation in the Earth, that's a major issue for deep time.
There are ways they can tell the duration of these things, but I think you wouldn't agree with any of them.
Well, you're going to have to appeal to radiometric dating.
That's one, yeah.
But then radiometric dating has nothing whatsoever to do with whether a shield volcano erupts or not.
No, it doesn't relate to if it erupts or not. It just says, here's when it started, here's when it ended.
Well, sure. And you can tell, again, you're kind of alluding to, relative dating sequencing, but we don't disagree on that. I'm trying to find the deep time that helps account for, the fossil record. Where's the deep time?
Well, my whole argument is from a biological perspective. I know you've said you don't like that, but just the fact that these things are.
I mean, pick your favorite example. Shark teeth on the continent. How did they get there?
Because oceans have moved over time, and land masses move over time.
The landmass is exactly why I brought up that hockey puck example.
Mm-hmm.
If the continent is moving today at a few centimeters per year, don't you think the most reasonable physics deduction from that is that it's slowing down over time? Even if you appeal to deep time.
I mean, there are processes in the core of the mantle that are keeping these things moving.
And this is exactly the weakness of deep time. There is no process.
Well, that's not even deep time. It's just how the mantle and the core and the interior of the earth are working.
Sure, but you have to have deep time to explain this mantle movement, because in the secular model, you've got this hot core, you've got a mantle, and you're basically dragging continents horizontally. But all of the thermal currents, heat radiates perpendicular. How do you get perpendicular heat radiation to drag something the size of a continent? And it's got this huge root underneath it. And you've allegedly got this heat coming up perpendicular, but moving the continent horizontal. Physics 101, you know what a three-body diagram is?
Not really familiar with that one.
All it means is you show which direction the forces are moving in a diagram. And in this example, your explanation is you've got heat coming up this way and you've got continents moving that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely opposite of everything you learn in basic physics.
I don't really know much about it, but I would think that's probably not necessarily true.
Well, I know more specifically, and I'm not trying to strawman, the position that I understand you're not totally familiar with it. I'm not trying to strawman the position anyway, because what they say is that these thermal currents are basically causing cold slabs to do like this and pull the continent with them. What's the problem? The problem is you're not using the physical process you're not using real world physical processes to make any of these conclusions that you're coming to, because the mantle is solid rock. It cannot drag physical interference through solid rock.
Well, there are convection currents in the mantle, are there not?
If you took a hot mass of aluminum, is essentially what they're describing. This is just an example. If you took a hot mass of aluminum, lead weighs more than aluminum, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you took a hot mass of aluminum that's still solid aluminum and you put a mass of lead on top of it, what's going to happen?
Sorry, say again.
If you took a hot mass of aluminum that's lower density, put high density lead on top of it, what's going to happen?
Lead's going to sink.
How far?
Below the aluminum?
No. The lead will settle a little bit, possibly, but it's going to settle a little bit and stop moving altogether. You know why? Because the aluminum is still solid. It's still very solid. And now you have physical interference that the lead cannot pull through. The physical interference is more than the difference in the density between the two, with or without the thermal currents. The physical interference is too much. It's solid. You're not just simply pulling something through there because you heated it up a little bit. You'd have to liquefy the aluminum to get the lead to sink through it.
Well, the entire continents are not sinking into the mantle, though.
I'm back to my free body diagram. What you allegedly have is these forces that are pulling the slabs kind of this way and then diving in, and the continent moving horizontally. The force vectors are in the wrong directions, in the wrong material, with the wrong material properties. It's a complete bust in basic physics.
I'm not really even sure we're debating at this point, to be honest.
I'm just, my whole point back you. I mean, good call. We need to stay on topic. But the whole point is a process does this. A real world physical process, put the fossils where they are, move the continents, flip the magnetic fields, cause C14 to exist or soft tissue. A real process happened. And so far you've given zero explanation for a real process that causes any of that.
Well, to be honest, I'm a little bit lost from all the talk about the mantle and the core and the magnets. And
no, so maybe fair enough. You can pick something if you want to bring something else up.
Or gentlemen, perhaps in light of how comprehensive that was, and I appreciate the technical nature of it as well. The audience has really enjoyed the back and forth discussion. I've enjoyed the free-flowing nature of it, and I think we've been thorough. I really wanted us to be thorough and engage in detail the most relevant points. And so why don't we take a 5-minute period each to sum up our thoughts, address anything we feel has been left hanging. That'll give the audience roughly 10 minutes as well to send in final questions, final objections and challenges, and then we can interact with those. And so let's give Jackson Roe. We'll give you the first concluding statement. Again, good opportunity to land the plane on our viewpoints and give the audience the best possible arguments and positions for them to examine, hopefully in an objective manner. Jackson, let me know when you're ready. I'll start the timer, and you have a concluding statement. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I think the most logical explanation is deep time. Just the fossils, 1,500 species of conodonts layered out in such a way. And I mean, TRock wants to say that, well, we don't know where they lived. And okay, surely one thing crosses over into the path of another at some point. You're telling me millions of species on Earth would never be found together in certain areas ever anywhere in the fossil record? So find a trilobite in Eocene strata, or find, I don't even know, there's anything. There are 100,000, literally thousands of examples you can find anywhere in the strata that would make no sense and be like, oh, maybe there's something wrong here. But to date, that hasn't really happened. I mean, I've found probably thousands of fossils looking at geologic maps, and specifically looking like, does anything here not line up with what they say should be here? And I haven't found one thing that doesn't make any sense. So even on the microscopic level, I found skulkodonts, conodonts, where they should be, exactly as expected. I mean, there's real predictive power behind this stuff. And I just really don't see any other way around it. But I appreciate TRock for doing this. Very polite debate, even though we kind of got into some like magnetic field side debates that kind of took up some time, but it was fun regardless. But yeah, thanks TRock, thanks Donny, and it was a lot of fun. So that's pretty much my conclusion.
Jackson, as long as you had a good time and felt like it was a fun debate, then this event was a success. And so Jackson, appreciate the concluding statement. And also, as you said, the several mini side debates that we got, which in a way could be a teaser to another debate in the future, but really focusing on the age of the earth question rather than just order of the fossils. TRock, I will reset the timer, and you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jackson. I appreciate your demeanor as well. You're really good to talk to because you allow some dialogue and stuff. But to answer your objection about how you should find something crossing paths, I think the very first thing you have to appreciate whenever you make that, what I deem to be not a good argument, is that you only have 1,656 years between creation and the flood, and a number of things happen immediately after creation week that directly impact the growth rate, the expansion rate of biodiversity on the planet. The commandment was given to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, immediately implying that it was not filled and had to go through a process. So the fact that you don't find crossing paths over 1,656 years of pre-flood history, to me, is completely a non-issue. And again, you have to know the history before you can say whether that even makes sense or not. If you're talking post-flood history, well, we've got 4,450 years or so since the flood, and we know that there was a complete reset. So we've had 4,450 years to re-diversify, but we've also had to do it in the midst of things like ice age, glacial land flooding, earthquakes and volcanoes and stuff like that absolutely stifle the spreading of biodiversity and populations and stuff like that. But I'm back to where we started at the beginning. You're trying to explain everything by a customized definition of what order is when you don't even know, you don't have any coherent grasp of what process put the fossils there in the first place. And again, the fossils did not put themselves there. Virtually every fossil, pre-flood especially, virtually all the fossils show very strong evidence of transport, meaning that's not where they lived, and it's mostly not where they died either. They were transported into their place. What was that process? Not to mention the missing of geological, like hundreds and hundreds of millions of years of geological time with no explanation whatsoever as to what the process might have been that caused that missing. And it's easy to throw erosion at it, but we saw direct photos of how flat those contacts are and how the utter lack of daily erosion, running streams and rainy seasons and freeze-thaw cycles and stuff, they just don't exist in the fossil record. Where is the apparent deep time and processes? Where is any of it? It's obvious it's all catastrophe. It's obvious when you find carbon-14 in soft tissue. It's very obviously recent. So all you can see in the fossil record is recent and catastrophe. Virtually nothing else. How do you even test what a rock looks like after 100,000 years of daily weathering? It's not even possible. You're well outside the scope of real science whenever you appeal to long time frames that you cannot test in any way whatsoever, other than just to appeal to something like radiometric dating, which has nothing whatsoever to do with daily weathering patterns. So it's this big interwoven deal. I think my final and one of my strongest points that I made was that the scientists in the literature freely expand timelines whenever they think they have a reason to, but then the entire explanation of the proposed evolutionary history is affected by it, but it's largely just summarily ignored. And then we hear comments like, I don't find any discrepancies. We'll shift the timeline 100 million years at a time, but I still don't see any discrepancies. But we don't have a complete fossil record either. We've heard all of that, and it honestly does not make sense. The global flood, where you see the interfingering of layers coming together, the wedging, the interlacing and stuff, it all spells fluid flow on top of the continents. Every bit of it does. So anyway, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. I enjoyed the conversation. Maybe in the future, Jackson can pick a different topic if he wants, or we can redo this one again sometime in the future. I'd be interested in talking about, the flood, post-life diversity, any of that kind of stuff, ice age. If any of those topics interest you, maybe we can talk about them in the future.
Thank you very much, TRock, for that concluding statement. Yes, it's an important topic. It is a big topic, the fossil record, and specifically the ordering or sorting of the fossils in that record in the geological rock strata. And so what I'd love to do in the spring or closer to the summer is host some form of roundtable discussion, few different evolution proponents, few different creation proponents. And so I do think it would be edifying to continue this debate in some way or fashion. And so, gentlemen, let's get into our questions. So we got some good questions here that I believe are going to help expand on a lot of what you guys have discussed over the last couple hours. And that's a positive side of audience Q&As, is it helps to make these debates that much more comprehensive and therefore informative. And so, okay, let's start at the beginning here. Question for TRock comes in from Creationist Crybaby. And so CC's question is this: not a single mammal, bird, dinosaur, or flowering plant is found fossilized in any rocks of the Grand Canyon, though they're found in some of the higher Grand Staircase layers. Why? Go ahead, TRock.
Two quick points on that. Number one, I'm not sure I entirely believe that, but whatever. I don't have a way to really validate why or why not that might be true, but I'll just go with it. Why? That's a fair question. Creationist crybaby. It's a fair question, because we're trying to explain the order of the fossil record, and I'm saying process put the sediment there. The sediment didn't put itself there either. What process put it there? It's a totally fair question, but the answer, I believe, in my particular model, since I'm not appealing to deep time and just summarily throwing not a process, just throwing time at it, what I'm going to tell you is that in the lower layers that you find that don't have mammals and birds and so on and so forth in them, they start out at a lower elevation where birds and dinosaurs don't live. And basically, I'll be very specific. So in the creation model, if somebody's being very general, they will tell you that, okay, sediments were deposited. Okay, but how? Not a lot of models get very specific at this point. What I think actually happened was you have offshore huge seismic activity, which generates huge seismic waves, but then you've also got a continent moving across the ocean floor at about 3 to 5 feet per second, or 35 meters per second, sorry, about 3 to 5 meters per second, about the pace of a brisk walk. But the continent's moving, and it's actually shoveling, and waves are pushing sediment at the same time. Again, water's incompressible. Anything that is on the continent is getting pushed off because water's incompressible. And if you've ever been caught in moving water in like a rapidly running river, for example, I have, it's strong and it moves you. You don't just sit there. And so the water comes up, pushes it off, and replaces it with the sediment that's down here. So you get the sediment come up on top. There are no dinosaurs in that sediment. It was offshore in the first place. Only what was in the ocean floor could be in that first wave. The North American continent looks to have moved from being joined up against Africa in a westerly kind of direction. And so whatever it was that was out there at the time this process began, that's what came up, scoured the land surface, swept all the land and plants, land animals and plants off, and replaced it with sediment that was down here. It's a super simple physical model to demonstrate by simply taking a shovel and scooping dirt, and you will see what happens. The dirt comes up, it gets on the bottom of the shovel, and now if you had anything loosely held on the shovel, it gets pushed right off.
Appreciate it, T-Rock. Jackson, any thoughts?
Well, it's really just kind of the argument I've been making this whole time about apparent order in the fossil record. So, I mean, I don't really have any more to add than that.
Okay, thank you, Jackson. So T-Rock, Jackson, appreciate that. Let's move to our next question here. One from One God Is Now Here. One, appreciate the support, $20 super chat, and also the question for Jackson Roe. Have you ever witnessed a radiometric blind test? If yes, please tell the chat what is required before the lab would accept the sample to be tested. Thanks.
No, I haven't witnessed that, but I have spoken to people who do that for a living, and it seems to be reliable. They don't find C14 in all the coal, and I mean, yeah, there's not a ton more to say about it, really.
Thank you, Jackson. T-Rock, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll apologize in advance because this is one I could go on for a long time about radiometric dating.
You get an hour limit to respond to.
1 hour limit. Okay, I might can live with that. But yeah, I have not witnessed a radiometric blind test, and I'll be honest with you, I know there are things called blind tests, double blind studies, that kind of thing, and I don't really know all of the dynamics behind them. But to me, if any kind of blind test, basically you give somebody a bunch of samples and you don't tell them anything and you just let them take the measurements. And then somebody who's not doing the testing has some sort of control sample that they would be comparing it to. The problem is none of this data, as near as I can tell, none of this data is super difficult to get. The data that I have downloaded on radiometric testing, it's not nearly as clean and pristine as what Jackson alluded to. If you go read an article in the scientific literature about the age of something, probably the only data you're going to get is specific to that particular study that they're doing in some specific location. What you're not going to get is the full-on world history database of radiometric dating that really shows what I saw when I downloaded radiometric data, and that is that the database is super messy. It's incomplete. There are conflicting lines of information in there, and years are counted by the Earth going around the sun, not by how many isotopes you find in a rock sample. They're two totally different things. And the fact that you can apply some sort of rate to isotopic ratios and convert it to alleged years, it's completely meaningless, because you can do that with just about anything, and you can come up with tons and tons of conflicting results on it that you only can validate if you already know how many times the Earth has been around the sun. So I'll stop.
Thank you, TRock. Jackson, you get the last word because the question was for you.
Well, I know that, about like the rate studies with like Andrew Snelling. I've read there are like 4 or 5 papers he did when he did this radiometric dating that supposedly invalidated it. The way I read it, he gives the explanation about why it failed at the end of every part of his paper. Like he tested amphibolites, which are metamorphic rock, which makes no sense. They never do that. He tested an open system in Australia with contamination from groundwater that shifted the parent-daughter isotopes all around. Those are the 2 that I remember sticking out in my mind, but that they all had some kind of problem like that. But anyway, that's all I have to say about radiometric dating for now.
Okay, appreciate it. There, Jackson. Andrew Cummings got a question, and he's got a question for you, TRock. If there's time, are you familiar with Walther's Law? And if so, what is your understanding of it?
Thank you for the question, Andrew. No, I'm not. If you care to elaborate on it a little bit, I might can give you a quick opinion, but that's all it would be.
Let's see what Walther's Law is. A fundamental principle in stratigraphy states that the vertical succession of sedimentary facies reflects lateral changes in depositional environments, meaning that sediments of adjacent environments come to lie on top of each other. Was there anything discussed in the discussion portion that is really relevant to that? And then did you have any thoughts just simply based on the definition, TRock?
Yeah, I mean, what he's describing is basically how relative dating is done. It's like you basically look at the physical characteristics. When you're talking about lateral movement, you're talking about the horizontal movement and saying, okay, it came from a place over here and was brought on top of this one. Okay, but you're not distinguishing deep time. You're not, basically it's the same thing I said to Jackson. Where is the apparent deep time in that? It's not apparent. It's fluid flow, and specifically hydrological fluid flow as opposed to air. In like the vast majority of the fossil record is in sediments that have been transported by water. Water doesn't take millions of years to creep across the continents. As soon as a volcano happens, or as soon as anything shifts, water moves very quickly. Where's the deep time?
Thank you,
TRock. Jackson, any thoughts?
I don't have a ton to add to that one. We can just go to the next one.
Okay. Next question is for Jackson. Why are there not millions of strange mutated fossils that failed?
Because that's not really how mutations work. I mean, sure, something might get selected out, but that doesn't mean it's going to have like an 8-legged mammal. You know, I think that's what he's probably alluding to. Like, we're not going to, but I mean, I guess that's what he's saying, but that's not just really what you're going to find.
Go ahead, TRock.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I can kind of see exactly what Jackson's saying, because if I were an evolutionist, I'd be like, my answer would be, well, you know, whenever something is not suited for its environment, it disappears very quickly. So population doesn't grow rapid enough in the secular explanation, doesn't grow rapid or large enough to have a chance to produce any fossils. But the real problem that they have, I mean, this is basically, if you're an evolutionist trying to explain this, you basically have to hand wave away all of geological processes in order to even assume that there should be fossils at all, because erosion, it's way too fast for millions of years. It's way too fast in modern times. Visible, obvious, real-time results of erosion, especially coastal erosion, happens way, way too fast. But part of what this alludes to is, if you're an evolutionist, in order for you to defend your history, you have to know what the first life was, like exactly what it was and exactly what process put it there, to know what it should look at any stage in the future. And they don't know that either. So you have to grant them all of this back history and just pretend that it's a non-issue in order just to get to a simple question like this. So I just don't see that evolutionists have any reasonable response. Even if they say what I said that makes sense, it's still not a reasonable response, because you don't know where the fossils came from or what put them there in the first place.
Thank you, TRock. Jackson, you get the last word. Go ahead.
I don't really have much to add past that either, to be honest.
Okay, no worries.
Nice question.
Creationist Crybaby's got another one for you, TRock, and here it is. Why do we see single-celled organisms in the lower layers of the Grand Canyon, and we see organisms getting more complex as you go up the geologic column to fish in the upper layers?
It's the same exact thing that we talked about earlier. It's basically the same question that Creationist Crybaby asked earlier. What process put them there? And I think I very thoroughly explained that. I mean, if anybody wants more specific clarification on the dynamics of how the earth moves, how water moves, why it is that you should preserve ecosystems, like practically entire ecosystems, just like in basically roughly the same envelope that they exist in real time in their living form. I mean, I'd be glad to talk some more about that, but it's, to me, you have zero argument against the creation model if you don't understand the mechanisms that I'm proposing, and you have zero argument against the creation model if you can't provide a cohesive, testable explanation yourself. And I've already pointed out, deep time is not testable. There's no way for people to experience, observe, test, or determine what deep time is like. So there you go. The more complex organisms live at a higher level. They get swept off the continent because the water is moving towards the continent, the continent's moving towards the water, and only what's in the seafloor replaces it.
Thank you, TRock. Jackson, any thoughts?
Well, I think I went over this quite a bit as well, so I think we can just go to the next one on this one also.
Okay. Here we go. It's been a thorough debate, that's for sure. You guys have covered the topic extensively. I like picking a challenge. In this case, the ordering in the fossil record. In another case, isochron dating or ERVs or chromosome 2 fusion, whatever it is. One challenge, 1 point, and dedicating a whole debate to it, because it gives the audience go-to events where they can just examine the evidence on one particular issue, rather when it's just too general, which there's a time and place for general creation evolution debates. You really only get a few minutes on any specific topic. But in this case, we get a whole debate dedicated to the ordering of fossils. And so here is a question from ADF ASD. So I think it's just a question for the both of you. And actually, this looks like it's our last question. So it's a good question to end it on, because he or she is wondering what the best. So let's just go through it here. Have the debater give their best rebuttal / argument against evidence against their own claim. Okay. So Jackson, why don't we start with you?
I have come up with some a long time. I've come up with some, but I honestly can't remember what they are. I'm really tired. So but I know that you guys do have some decent arguments. I'm not saying you don't. So here and there, yeah. But
but you're too tired to lay one out.
no, I'm serious. I can't.
No, that's okay. No, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing you. Go, TRock.
I was just going to ask Jackson. Jackson, I mean, what do you think is a good argument against your model?
Well, a good argument, like a good finding, I guess, would be find a bunch of stuff out of order, like what I've talked about: pollen in the Precambrian, cononant teeth in the Eocene. You know, that would be a good place to start, or just something that doesn't add up for my worldview. You know.
TRock, feel free to answer the question however you'd like to.
Okay, so for me, the best rebuttal against my own claim, I'm going to say something that a lot of people probably are not going to like, and it is that when you're arguing against the young Earth model, basically all logical fallacies are created equally. They're logical fallacies. They're not good arguments. And that is ad nauseum the only arguments ever presented against the young Earth model is that you basically have to appeal to some logical fallacy, whether it's a bait and switch, or it's a non sequitur, or it's misinformation, or it's, don't understand my model. I kid you not. I don't take these things lightly. I kid you not. I have yet to hear an argument against the young Earth, against the biblical model and a young Earth in general, that is not rooted in some sort of fallacy. Now, there are specific models out there, like we were talking about earlier. There's HPT, CPT, there's even VPT, vertical plate tectonics, that was proposed by one individual. But if you're arguing against specific models, yes, there are some valid arguments against them. And I don't really want to answer this question that specifically. So you might find fault with my particular model. That's okay. But when you're trying to argue against biblical history, you have to argue against an eyewitness account when you're not the eyewitness. You have to argue against, you have to basically switch back and forth and say things like, microevolution and macroevolution are the same thing. You have to do things like what we heard from Jackson, no offense, Jackson, but when you appeal to biology to explain the process that put fossils where they were, you're in logical fallacy zone. They didn't put themselves there. And so I personally, I just cannot come up with a good argument. I try, and I'll be honest with you, I try to come up with good reasons to say, and I try to come up with, and I try to find them in the critics' commentary, interacting with people in the comment section, watching presentations and videos and interaction between other creationists and evolutionists. I try to find the reasonable arguments that they're making, and they're virtually unanimously rooted in some sort of fallacy. So sorry, I just don't have any good arguments because the evolutionists don't come up with them. They come up with logical fallacies and appealing to biology to explain the process that put the biology there.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for your answers to our final question there. And also thank you again for the time, the energy, the research, and all of the work, the effort that you both put into the preparation to have the knowledge and information necessary to give us a solid, thought-provoking, and engaging debate on the question, what best explains the order of fossils in the rock record. And so I've really enjoyed this. I can tell the audience did as well, because they had a lot of good, solid, on-topic questions. And again, I always appreciate a good, focused debate. And so moving forward, especially into the spring and the summer, I would love more debates where we pick a single topic, a single challenge or point, and then dedicate an entire event to it. And so, gentlemen, let's get some quick final words, final thoughts. Again, excellent debate. Appreciate your time. Jackson, over to you. Final words, final thoughts.
Just thank you guys for doing this. And I'm really tired, so I'm going to go hit the hay, I think.
Come
But
on, let's
thank
do
you.
another.
It
Let's
was
do
fun.
another 2.5-hour debate on ERVs this time. No.
Yeah.
You've earned yourself a good rest, Jackson. Appreciate you doing this. TRock, thank you as well for doing this and for being here for tonight. TRock, final words, final thoughts.
Yeah, thanks again to everybody that participated. Jackson, I really appreciate dialoguing with you because I think one thing that does make you very different than a lot of people. I mean, and to be fair, I interact quite a bit with people through the comments and on YouTube and stuff like that. But you're not as assumptive about things to the degree that a lot of critics are. A lot of critics make big assumptions about my position, about things that I can spell it out like in plain written text, where they can read it as much as they want, and they still manage to misunderstand the argument and make bad assumptions about what I said, as well as my particular model. And I appreciate the fact that you don't do that. You're fairly unassuming in that regard, and that's always nice. Having said that, the critics at large, it's pretty much a given. They won't bring data. They'll misunderstand my argument. They will misrepresent my argument. And then they will walk away thinking that they have the intellectual high ground. But their whole model is supposed to be data driven, but data never shows up in these debates. And to the extent that it has, I've brought more data than anybody else I know from the critic side, and it's messy, complicated stuff. And so I don't think science supports that position. But anyway, I digress. Jackson, thank you very much. Maybe we can do it again in the future. Donny, I think a great topic for us to get into one of these days is philosophy of science.
Yeah, that'd be good.
The biblical model versus the naturalist model.
I like it. I like that idea. We will talk and hopefully set up some more edifying programs just like this, but also one on the philosophy of science. Very good recommendation, TRock. Okay, Jackson and TRock, we are going to let you gentlemen out of here for the night. Appreciate your time and a good, engaging debate. This is what we need, guys. Focus topics and go-to debates on common challenges, in this case, the ordering of the fossil record. And so I am going to do just a couple minutes here of reminders and announcements. It is going to be a little shorter than usual, but in terms of a biblical creation seminar that we have coming up, I'm going to release a whole video breaking down all the details of this. And so this is just going to be a quick teaser announcement on it, and then expect a full video breaking down all the necessary details. This is going to be on March 26th. It is a creation seminar with speakers from the Institute for Creation Research, Genesis Apologetics. We've also got Dr. Carl Werner there from the Grand Experiment. And so we've got Dr. Randy Galuza, Dr. Brian Thomas, Dr. Dan Biddle, Dr. Carl Werner. I am extremely pumped for this. And so you can make sure that you're here live by hitting the notification bell. You can check the event section of our website here for the promo. And this link will take you right to the live event where you can hit the notification bell, hit the like button. Guys, this is going to be an excellent seminar. You definitely do not want to miss this one. And again, I will be putting out a video explaining all the details. You can also go to Facebook, Standing For Truth Ministries Facebook page. I've got an event there that you can sign up for and let people know that you're going to attend, and that way you don't miss it. So guys, a lot there. And again, expect a video soon going over these details. We had a catastrophic plate tectonic seminar, a program with Dr. John Baumgardner on Monday. I do want to encourage people to check it out if they haven't seen it. This was comprehensive. I've seen people sharing it around, pointing out that this is the most comprehensive, clear, concise, video or seminar on catastrophic plate tectonics that you can find. And it really was thorough. It left no stone unturned. It was nearly 4 hours. And I really appreciate Dr. John Baumgartner's work. And I really appreciate the time that he offered for this important seminar. So do check that one out. That was on Monday. We will be back here on Friday. I am pumped for this one. This one is going to be a fantastic debate. Everything's confirmed. We're good to go. This Friday, 6:30 p.m. EST, the Great Nephilim Debate. Controversial one. And I am thrilled to be having these pastors, Pastor George Antonios, Pastor Tommy McMurtry, to engage the debate question, who are the sons of God? Then on Monday, we'll be here with Doctors Jerry Bergman and Chris Thompson, the Great Origin of Species debate. I have been excited for this ever since we confirmed the details and got this booked. And time flies by when you're having fun because the day is almost here, and I can almost predict with certainty that this will be a good, informative debate on the origin of species. Again, guys, that's just a real quick teaser, just a real quick sneak preview into everything we have for you. Please utilize all the material that we have. Check out the website, standfortruthministries.com. Of course, if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to this channel. Check the upcoming live stream section for many reasons. One reason being organization, as we host here roughly 4 to 5 live events. And then we also have a lot of videos that we premiere. And so typically, as soon as I get an event confirmed, whether it's an interview, a debate, a discussion, a seminar, I will send that information out to my wife, who's the team designer here. She makes all these awesome thumbnails. And so we'll get a thumbnail, and then I'll put it up on the channel in the upcoming live stream section in order that you can see, for the most part, what we have for you in the months to come. And so check the upcoming live stream section. We have a ton of great creation speakers coming up, which I'm excited for. A lot of exciting debates, just interviews, a little bit of everything for you guys. And so, okay, we will see you again soon. We're hoping to release our mega video on Adam, Eve, Origins, and Ancestry that Matt and I did in two separate recordings. Matt did one, I did one. And Brian from Apologetics 101, he's been working overtime editing it together, and he has assured me that it is ready and good to go. And so we are hoping to premiere that after he uploads it to his channel. Hopefully, maybe even tomorrow, but definitely by the weekend. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this good, solid technical showdown on the fossil record between TRock and Jackson Roe as much as I did. And so appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you all very soon. God bless. Stand for Truth is out.